Sinclair, Apple Floppy Days, Commodore, Tandy Floppy Days, Atari, TI Floppy Days. The weekend comes, the disk drive hums, ready to code for you. These days we're all happy and free. Those floppy days, the games we play, you shared with me. Those days, Motorola, Intel 6502, graphics and text are there to view. Composite, color, or RGB, program fun for you and me.
Floppy Days is recorded in a live studio.
Inside PC Floppy Days, ST Amiga Floppy Days, Junior Sinclair Floppy Days, Classic Days, Microwaves, geeking all week with you. These days we're all happy and free. Those floppy days, the games we play, you shared with me. Those days, these floppy days are yours and mine. These floppy days are yours and mine. Floppy days.
I'm Everett Kaser. I've been around Series 80 since 1979, or maybe even part of 1978. I was not part of the HP development team for the 85, but I did develop the assembler ROMs for the 85 and the 87, and worked on many other programs and aspects of the 75, both in the lab and in marketing. So the Series 80 has a very fond place in my heart. I was probably about 30, somewhere in there, when I got involved with the Series 80. So it was kind of in the golden years of my career. And at that time, it seemed like everybody and their brother was developing microcomputers. There were tens, if not hundreds, of different microcomputers available, some from big name companies and many from little startups and garage operations. And most of them were very basic, very primitive, used audio cassettes to record. They were just what you would expect in an industry that's just starting up. Microprocessors were just coming into being in the early to middle 70s, and that started this explosion of microcomputers, and which eventually spawned the Apple Computer Company and the IBM PC. And squeezed in between there were a lot of other little microcomputers, and one of them from HP was the HP85 and the 8687. Unfortunately, those computers were all pretty well doomed right before they even started, just because although the Series 80, the 85 was, in my mind, a wonderful machine. It had many, many great things about it. It was not a general purpose computer. It was targeted specifically at science and engineering, especially. And although there were attempts to make it more friendly towards business applications, VisiCalc, Word 80, File 80 later on, it really was fundamentally a science and engineering computer. And that's understandable because at that time, HP was very strongly an engineering company. Scientific engineering, a lot of instrumentation, and that had been their background. It was their background. And the 85 was developed by the division of HP that created all of HP's calculators, which many people today don't know anything about because they've disappeared as well. But for at least 10 to 15, if not 20 years, HP was the Cadillac of calculators, if that phrase means anything to people today. And the 85 being an engineering scientific computer, it was not ever going to survive for very long. And that the end was brought about by the introduction of the IBM PC, which was a general purpose computer that was built and sold by a large international corporation. And that was really what was needed to solidify the world of desktop computers. And once that happened, pretty much every other little microcomputer fell by the wayside or survived in a very small niche market. And so that was the fate of the 85. The 85 and the Series 80 computers, the first one was introduced right at the beginning of 1980, and by 1984, it was all pretty much over. I think the IBM PC was introduced around 81 or 82, and it only took a year or two for the writing on the wall to become a neon sign that said, "This is it. This is the direction everything is going." And although a follow-on to the 86 and 87 was being designed, which I think would have been a wonderful machine had it ever been developed, it was ungloriously killed off before the development ever got very far by the directors of HP, because they knew where things were going, and they knew they'd be throwing money down the well. The 85 to me was a great learning ground. I learned many things working on it, and there were many aspects of the 85 and the 86, 87 that were just really cool, very well implemented, solid machines, and it kind of set the standard for me personally for any computer that was to come. And there have been many computers since then, and we've gone a long ways. But my roots are in Series 80, and that's where my whole career has grown out of that.
The TRS-80 Model 3.
Introducing the Apple IIc.
Atari 1040 ST.
Commodore 64.
PC Junior, new from IBM.
Discover Atari.
It's at his Radio Shack Color Computer 3.
Introducing the Timex Sinclair 1000.
For computer, this is the one. Texas Instruments home computer.
A wonder computer of the 1980s. The Commodore VIC-20.
Hello and welcome to episode 64 of the Floppy Days Podcast, where old computers come to live. I'm Randy Kindig, and I'm happy to bring you this episode this month. This episode is part 2 about the HP Series 80 line of microcomputers. Last month, I interviewed two well-known members of the HP Series 80 community, Everett Kaser, former HP engineer who worked on the Series 80 and runs Kaser.com, and Vassilis Prevelakis of Series80.org. This month, they're back to help me talk about the history of these fabulous machines. It's a fascinating conversation with two gentlemen who have a lot of love and knowledge about these machines. I want to thank Everett for providing the intro to this episode with his memories of the Series 80. Before getting into the meat of the program, I do intend to talk briefly about any new vintage computer acquisitions, upcoming shows, and a little bit of feedback. Okay, let's fire up the old HP85 and see what we can learn.
This is Jim Battle, creator of the CompuColor.org website, and you're listening to Floppy Days.
This is part of the show where I like to go through any new acquisitions that I have managed to get my hands on since the last show. My first new item this month is one for the Atari 8-bit. I was finally able to fill a hole in my Atari book collection that I've been trying to fill for some time. The book is called Compute's Atari Collection Volume 2. It's a beautiful red volume published in '85 and has more than 24 never-before-published programs like games, applications, utilities, and educational programs. I looked through the index, and it has it has programs like Electronic Football, Hoppo, Termites, Pits of Pluto, Double Brickout, which are all games, Magic Directory, Data Management System, and Mailing Utility, which are all applications, Scroll Protect, and Data Dumper, which are programming aids, and SuperPlot and Graphics Plus, which are graphics programs. Now, I think this pretty much completes my Atari 8-bit compute library, but I need to check on that to make sure. The next item is something for any vintage computer that uses the standard 9-pin Atari joysticks, and that's the Aladdin controllers. My first live view of this device was at VCF Southeast this year, where I actually got to meet Ed Kelly, one of the developers of the controllers. And I didn't pick up one at the show, and I kicked myself later for not doing so. So a couple months later, I decided to take the plunge and actually purchase one. These are very large, very well constructed controllers that turn your gameplay pretty much into an arcade-like experience. There are a few models, including the Super 78, the Super Twin 78, and the Supreme 78. Now, I just purchased the low-end model, the Super 78, which has 2 buttons and a ball joystick, rather than the Super Twin 78, which has 2 sets of each for 2-player action or for playing games like Robotron. But nevertheless, I'm extremely happy with my purchase. This makes gameplay a whole lot of fun, and I know this thing is going to last for many years to come. And then finally, I picked up another book from my collection. This one is called Microcomputer Experimentation with the Intel SDK85 by Lance Leventhal and Colin Walsh, and it was published in 1980. Now, I haven't talked about the Intel SDK85 before, so I thought I'd briefly cover it here. It turns out that each time Intel launched a new microprocessor, they would often simultaneously provide a system development kit, or SDK, which would allow engineers, students, or others to familiarize themselves with the new processor's features. The SDK single-board computers allowed the user to enter object code from a keyboard or upload it through a communication port and then test the code. They often provided a system monitor ROM, and the kits varied in the specific features that they had, but generally offered optional memory and interface configurations. The SDK85 system design kit was a single-board microcomputer system kit using the 8085 processor, clocked at 3 MHz, and it contained all the components required to complete construction of the kit. So it had an LED display, a keyboard, resistors, caps, etc. And it had a pre-programmed ROM with a system monitor. The kit had a 6-digit LED display and a 24-key keyboard for direct insertion, examination, and execution of a program. The maximum user RAM was limited to 194 bytes, and then there was a full 256 bytes available on the expansion RAM. So I enjoy picking up books like this. It's a lot of fun when you're in a used bookstore to run across a book like this. They're always fun to page through and to own them in my library. Now, I had a few more items that I purchased this month, but I'm going to save them for next month.
I'm Peppy Totso, author of the book Retro Electro, and you're listening to Floppy Days.
All right, let's talk about upcoming shows this year. Now, it is getting a little bit late in the year, so there aren't a lot of shows remaining in 2016, at least that I'm aware of. There might be others that I'm not aware of. But, of course, Vintage Computer Festival Midwest is coming up September 10th through the 11th. I had a special show, just my last episode 63, about VCF Midwest, where I interviewed Jason Timmons, so listen to that if you want more details. I am planning to be there. I'm also planning to have an exhibit, and I'm also planning to give a talk. I believe what I'm going to end up doing is giving a talk about modern upgrades for your vintage computers. That's a topic that I've always had a strong interest in, and I thought that might be interesting for others as well. Also, October 15th at the Evanston Public Library will be the Chicago International World's Fair, and Hal Shanafield is the one who is the chairman of that. Now, by the time you hear this, I may have, or shortly thereafter, we'll have an interview with Hal where we talk about that particular show, so you can find out more about it. And finally, Vintage Computer Festival Europe, which occurs in Zurich, Switzerland, November 19th through the 20th of 2016. So if you're over in that direction, certainly take a look at trying to go to that show. And that's it for shows.
There are moments in history when all of the right pieces come together to form something world-changing. On August 3rd, 1977, at the Warwick Hotel in New York City, Radio Shack unveiled the TRS-80 microcomputer. 2017 marks the 40th anniversary for the TRS-80 line of microcomputers. And to celebrate this momentous occasion, CocoFest invites you to bring all models of TRS-80 microcomputers, big or small, beige or silver, from Pocket Computer to Model 16. You're invited to participate, make presentations, and meet other TRS-80 enthusiasts in a casual, relaxing atmosphere. Let's celebrate the entire line of TRS-80 microcomputers together. Whether you live for the Z80, the 68000, or the 6809, now is a unique opportunity to assemble the entire Radio Shack catalog of TRS-80 microcomputers. Come on, you have a lot to celebrate. Join us at CocoFest in Lombard, Illinois, April 22nd and 23rd, 2017. CocoFest. Become part of the equation.
Okay, next up is feedback. I always love to get feedback and appreciate everybody who writes in. And it's particularly interesting. A couple of these pieces of feedback that I got are from international people that are not in the U.S. And so one of the reasons I like to cover those in particular is because you kind of get a different perspective on the machines. There definitely were some machines that were available outside of the U.S. that I don't know anything about, and I enjoy getting letters from people who have those machines and can tell us a little bit about them. The first one I got is from Andy Collins. Andy is a good friend. He's been writing in to me for some time now about the podcast, and I appreciate all the emails that he sends. In this one, he said, on the machine front, have you thought about the RML 380Z? It's a Z80 CPM 80 machine that was put into secondary schools and colleges before the BBC Micro came out and got everywhere. On another note, I've added a few new machines to my collection: an Apple SE30, Sharp MZ-KDA, a Tidy MZ700, an Auric 1, which is a 6502 based Sinclair Spectrum style machine, which is getting quite rare now, and an Exidy Sorcerer. Very lucky to get one of these. I've wanted one for a very long time and got lucky. Sadly, I'm going to have to get rid of a machine or two or three to fund it, but nothing I think of as too precious or personal. A PET, a Sharp, and an iMac. Anyway, enough ramblings. Keep smiling, Randy, and keep in touch. Yes, thank you, Andy. The Exidy Sorcerer, I am very jealous. That is a machine that would be really neat to have. I did do an episode on that machine, and I thought it just was a really interesting one. They go for a lot of money, though, when they come up on eBay, so I don't ever expect to be able to own one. The next piece of email I got is also from across the pond. This is from Stephen Walters. He says, I'm a TRS-80 fan, 2 Model 3s, 2 Model 4s, a Video Genie, 11 BBC computers, 11 Acorn Electrons, 11 TI-99 4As, some VIC-20s, C64 Amigas, and I'm sure there's more. 2 Atari 65 XEs and an Atari 800 XL. I enjoy both your podcasts, Floppy Days and Trash Talk, and I have some suggested subjects. The TRS-80 clones, such as the Video Genie LNW-80 and the Mini knockoff clones. Video Genie, LNW-80, and the Mini knockoff clones. The Dragon 32 and 64 TRS-80 Coco clones, also known as the Tano Dragon in the US. The Apple II clones, such as the Franklin Ace, the Peanut, the Pineapple, the Microprofessor, Bell & Howell Black Apple. The Ugly Ducklings, unloved and forgotten, such as the Sharp MZ80K and A, Sharp MZ700 and MZ800, and the Apple III. The forgotten workhorses such as the Intech Superbrain, and modern kit computers like Brill computers and the Australian Micro-B. And finally, I got a short email from James Shackle that I thought I would read. He said, "Hey Randy, I credit your podcast for getting me back into retro computing on my TI-99 4A. I've been enjoying the hobby for a few months now. Thank you for those informative interviews on the TI. This week I finished the 3 episodes on the Coco, a system I knew nothing about. Your podcast continues to satisfy my curiosities." James Shackle, known as Air Shack on Atari Age. And that's it for feedback this month.
Why buy just a video game from Atari or any television? Invest in the wonder computer of the 1980s for under $300. The Commodore VIC-20. Unlike games, it has a real computer keyboard. With the Commodore VIC-20, the whole family can learn computing at home. Plays great games, too. Under $300, the wonder computer of the 1980s, the Commodore VIC-20.
Coming soon, Commodore brings you Gorf, the Wonder arcade game, and Omega Race in home versions.
All right, well, I want to start out with the history of the machine, and I was trying to find some history about Hewlett-Packard. And one thing I came across to start out with was a small story by Steve Wozniak, who used to work at HP. And I thought I would start out with that, and then you guys can chime in if there's anything more you know about this. But basically, Steve indicated in his memoir somewhere, he said, in our lab at HP, we had a desktop computer called the 9830 that ran BASIC. It was designed for the scientific community and cost $10,000, so it wasn't a personal computer. He says, that was my goal with the Apple I. You could sit down, turn it on, and start typing. There were a few of us in the lab at HP who were interested in microcomputers. We had proposed it to the lab manager. We sat down and had a meeting and worked out on paper how we could have a little $800 machine that could run BASIC and connect to a home TV. Now, this guy had been the project manager of HP's 9830 desktop BASIC machine, and he knew why this couldn't be an HP product. He was right. HP just couldn't do a hobby product. They just couldn't get into an evolving market when it was too young and unforeseen. So he turned it down, and I got a legal release. After we started shipping Apple I's, our calculator division at HP started a little 8-bit processor project called Capricorn. I'd already done most of the stuff they were doing, but they wouldn't let me work on that project. And then Steve left HP shortly after that. So I thought that was an interesting story. Had you guys heard that story before?
I had not heard it in detail, but I do remember back in the 80s, while I was at HP, hearing that Steve Wozniak had worked at HP and that he left to do the Apple because he couldn't get a project going there at HP, and then the 85 came along. The details, I had never heard any of the specific details as he recounts them there, but I wouldn't be at all surprised by them.
And it's very plausible because they wouldn't be able to make something so low cost, given this fixation with quality and and sourcing of first-class components. In order to do something so cheap, you had to go, you had to cut corners. And I think at that time HP was not into cutting corners. I mean, they did understand, the need to reduce costs, but they were very fixated on quality.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I don't think it doesn't seem like, I know HP later got into the home computer market, but that they were a different company by then. I think the company they were at that time really was not the right kind of company to be coming out with a home computer. Would you agree?
I would absolutely agree.
Yeah.
At that time, everything was over-engineered to the point that a tank could drive over it. And the idea of HP at that point in time doing something like the Apple I or the Apple II computer, it was just a totally different level of engineering and a different attitude towards engineering.
I wonder how they felt later, having turned down the Apple I project that Steve had to offer to them.
But in fact, you can see that they had a very friendly outlook towards other people. They were not like, mine, all mine kind of, Daffy Duck mentality. I mean, when these guys made a proposal and they couldn't do anything with it, they signed a release. They allowed them to go out and make their own product.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, very, very generous.
Mm-hmm.
But it makes sense. I mean, these guys were engineers. They were trying to help, other people. They were not, fixated with intellectual property and rights and patents and stuff. But to get an idea of how these things were working then, I think we have to go back more than 10 years before the HP85 was introduced, when they were making their first desktop computer calculator, the 9100. And in fact, they were making mini computers essentially at the time, but I don't remember if it was Hewlett or Packard, but he said, I want a desktop computer calculator, and they said, okay, desktop, how big? And he had a desk next to his big desk, a small side desk, the ones that you usually put electric typewriters at the time. And he said, about that big. So they went to design something that would fit there. And I think in some HP site, I found a story that when they made the 9100 and they brought it to install it on his desk, they realized it was too big and wouldn't fit. So while he was away, they hacked away at his desk to make the computer fit there. So it just shows a casual environment, very, very friendly and creative. And then they went to produce generations of big desktop computers. They would call them calculators, although they were running BASIC, because of the way procurement worked at the time. If you were ordering a computer, then you have to go through the IT division, or it was considered a big purchase. If you were ordering a calculator, then nobody would bother you. It would go through the smaller budget. So they would call them calculators. And I think the 9825 was, their best instrumentation computer at the time. It's superb. I actually bought one, an A model, and it's very well made. I mean, it's unbelievable. Really nice computer. It only has a one-line alphanumeric screen, but it has, like the 85, it has a built-in printer, and it has a small, the same kind of tape drive.
So this was one of the predecessors to the 80 series. It sounds like.
I think you can see the evolution. Mm-hmm. You know, you go from a display that can only display numbers, and then you go into an alphanumeric display, and then you go into a small monitor. For the 85, I think that little 6-inch monitor is very cute. It was cute back in 1980 and still cute when I see it, even though it looks old, but it's really cute. I mean, I love this computer.
Mm-hmm. So, in like you said, in '76 they came out with the 9825, which had the one-line display. In '78 they came out with the 9845, which did have a full display. Do you have one of those also?
No, it's a monster.
Oh, okay.
This thing is a monster.
Uh-huh.
If you look at pictures, you can say, yeah, it's like a desktop computer, like an IBM PC with a monitor on top. This thing is heavy. I was very tempted to buy one. There was a guy in Canada that was selling a system with hard disk drives, a fully configured 9845, I think was a T model, which was the everything but the kitchen sink thrown in. But it was too big for me. You know, I try to buy stuff that I can carry myself. I don't want to buy.
Then I'd have to rent a truck to take it home, huh?
Right. That's one of the reasons why I didn't buy an HP tape drive, one of these, 1970s tapes, the reel-to-reel that you see in science fiction movies. Mm-hmm. There was one at the time. They were appearing in the when I was in the States. They were appearing on eBay, but I didn't want to buy one because it was too big. I mean, the computer with the tape drive was something like 3 to 4 times the size and weight of the 85. And I've seen a video on YouTube on some guy using an 85 to drive one of these things, and I was envious. I have to admit that.
Okay. Well, then there was an evolution, I think, after that with the to the HP 9835 A and B, and then the 9825B, and then a 9845C, and then eventually in 1980 is when they came out with the HP Series 80. So,
yep.
you can go ahead.
You do have to remember that all of those previous machines came out of Colorado.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And the Series 80 came out of the Corvallis, Oregon division, which actually started in the Bay Area as the Advanced Products Division. So there's kind of while it was the same company, HP, especially at that time, the divisions operated as almost independent companies, and there could actually be a bit of rivalry between the divisions. And if one division came up with a product that was similar to products in another division, they wouldn't necessarily go to that division and say, hey, why don't you help us with this, or give us advice on this.
Really?
It frequently would be a start from scratch design thing. And at some point, the corporate people would come around once or twice a year to do division reviews, and they would review what products you're working on, how your sales are going, what products you plan to work on in the future, so on and so forth. And they would see what you're thinking about or what you're working on, compare it to what's going on in other divisions, and say, nah, wait a minute, we don't want this duplication of efforts, or this is colliding. Or they might say, well, this is colliding with that division, but we still think it's a good idea to do it, which is essentially what happened with the Series 80. As an example, somewhere in the early to middle 80s, engineers at the Corvallis division started working on a plotter project, which I think they called it Sweet Lips, but I'm not sure. And it was the first, to my knowledge anyway, I'm pretty sure that it was the first of HP's plotters that wasn't where you put the whole sheet down on a platen or a flat plotter table, but it actually had rollers that moved, the pen just went back and forth in one direction and the paper got rolled back and forth in the other direction. And I remember the prototype that they made was actually put into the top of a 5 1/4, a Series 80 5 1/4 inch disk drive case. They used that as the case to build this thing in. They'd cut a slot in the top for the paper roller. And then they actually had it going to the point where it was starting to work, and then the San Diego division, who was the plotter division, didn't like that, and corporate said, "Yeah, this doesn't make sense for you guys to be working on plotters when San Diego's doing plotters," and so that whole project and the technology got moved to the San Diego division. So that's an example of how the divisions kind of worked independently and would sometimes come up with competing products, and at some point corporate would either give it their blessing or play parent and say, no, you're going to do this and you're not going to do that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how they could have been successful without at least doing some technology sharing, though.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, the 85 has a tape drive, which takes the same format of cartridges as the 9825 and the 9845. Mm-hmm. The tape drive itself is of a different design internally. It has more custom chips. The 9825 is a beauty. I mean, you can repair it using off-the-shelf parts, but surely they must have some understanding of the issues involved, and in order to choose this kind of format for an I/O device.
I'm sure there was communication and working between the divisions for some of those common type parts. As you say, they used the same physical cartridges, but with the 85 they had very little space and very limited power available, electrical power, so they had to design a whole new transport mechanism that would fit in underneath the printer in the 85. And while you can read the 9845 and 25 or 35 tapes on the Series 80, really about all you can exchange are data files, and even then some of the file types are not exactly right, so you have to use a special binary program to read the tape. And I remember they had binary programs to do that back then. So there was some communications, obviously, and some transfer of information and technology. It was kind of a friendly competition. It's like everybody's playing in their own little sandbox, and of course, engineers being engineers and marketers being marketers, they all wanted to be the top dog on whatever product it was they were working on. But there was a fair amount of cooperation between the divisions, too.
So was there some kind of central purchasing for parts? Because, for example, this funny screen that the 87 has, I remember there was a terminal made by HP at the time that had a similar sized tube, this, short and wide kind of screen. I remember at the time when I saw the 85, I said, "Where did they get these tubes?" I mean, they look totally weird.
Yeah, I think that tube was kind of custom arranged for the 85. It may have been used late. If one division sourced a part or came up with a part, and then some other division said, hey, we can use that, then certainly they would order parts. There's no sense, reinventing the wheel in that sense. They just like ICs, the corporate had a lot of standard parts, the industry standard parts, but they would buy them in large quantities from a supplier and stamp their own part number on it, and lots of different divisions would then use those same ICs. And the same would be true of any other pieces that one division was using that another division could use in their own product. And obviously it saves money and time and resources to share those kinds of things.
Do you have any recollection as to why they decided to go for a custom processor for the Series 80?
I don't. By the time I got involved, they started the work on the 85 while the APD division was still down in the Bay Area, and they moved up to Corvallis in, I think it was early summer of 76, and I didn't start working at HP until, it was 76. I didn't start working at HP until October of 76, and I wasn't even involved in the 85 at all until late 78 or early 79, somewhere in there. So there was a lot of the early developments of the 85 I really don't know a lot about firsthand. All I know is what I heard, stories I heard or was told. But my understanding and my belief is that one of the primary reasons for doing their own custom processor was that they wanted a BCD math capability because it was a scientific engineering product, and they wanted good, accurate math routines. And those are very difficult to do with a processor that's only capable of doing binary math. You ended up with things like the square root of 4 coming out to being 1.999999999, which was pretty common in calculators at that time.
Sure.
You would see those kinds of results. And
you would even see it in spreadsheets. In early spreadsheets, you would have this kind of funny results.
Yep. And you have to remember that HP had been doing handheld calculators for a number of years before that, and they had developed this BCD processor technology for those. And so it was and so since Corvallis, what became the Corvallis division, which was the APD division, which is where the original HP35 calculator was invented, they were doing all those calculators, so they had that BCD math mindset and technology. So once they decided to build their own little desktop calculator computer, it was only natural that they would want a BCD type processor. So that's my strong suspicion that that's the trail that led them to doing their own processor. You have to keep in mind also that they had no plans to support end users or anyone besides themselves actually writing machine language code for this thing. So they didn't really care if it was a standard processor or not. Their idea was to sell a sealed solution, something that people would write in BASIC, and they would never see the underlying machinery. And it was only at introduction that they realized that people wanted assembly language. And so at that point it became more important and more of an issue.
Okay. Excellent. So the HP85 was introduced in January 1980. It was a desktop computer, as we said, with a 5-inch CRT, a cute little 5-inch CRT, a tape cassette drive, a thermal printer, and 4 I/O slots. Yeah, the information I have says it cost $3,250 at introduction, although I think, Vassilis, you said you saw some higher numbers than that.
For Europe. For Europe.
Okay.
I'm not disputing your numbers. I'm just giving just gave that number to give you an idea that in Europe it was even more expensive to get an 85.
Yeah. Well, they had to ship it over there, right? So.
Well, taxes. I mean, and support. I know that for the 9845 series, they were doing custom keyboards, for the German market, for the French market. I think that for the 445, they even had a special keyboards and character sets for the Japanese market. I don't know if there were this kind of customizations for the Series 80.
Yeah, yes, there was.
Okay.
They did have localized keyboards, certainly for the major markets that they were selling into. French, German, Swiss. They had Swiss Italian and Swiss French, Spanish. I'm not sure if they had Japanese or not. There was a Japanese engineer that came over that I helped him write a binary program that allowed them to enter kanji. Enter kanji characters on the 85 by typing various keys combinations. But I don't think they had a Japanese keyboard for the Series 80. I may be wrong. Long time ago.
Okay. So as Vassilis mentioned, there was a custom 8-bit processor, several other custom integrated circuits, and I understand that basically almost all the chips that were inside this were all made by HP. That they're, except maybe the RAM chips, that everything else was HP. Is that correct?
Very much so. It was a printer controller, a CRT controller, a tape controller, a keyboard controller, the CPU, I/O translator chips. Even the RAM chips may have been made by HP, although they were pretty standard dynamic RAM chips.
Yeah.
I think the ROM chips were weird in the sense that they were auto-incrementing the counter. So you cannot use standard off-the-shelf ROMs for that.
That's correct. And the other thing is that the voltages inside, all of the chips inside the computer were running at 6 volts, whereas the standard voltages at that time were pretty much 5 volt. So when you go from the inside of the 85 out into the I/O cards that plug into the back, they had each card had a translator chip which shifted the voltage levels from 6 volts down to 5 volts, because then in the I/O card there was an I/O processor, an 8049, a standard, I think it's an Intel 8049 processor that they used to drive the I/O, and it ran at 5 volts. So most of the stuff inside the machine had to be custom.
To go back to the introduction date, I think the Series 80, the 85A, was introduced in 79, not 1980.
It wasn't January 1980?
It was very late 79.
Was it? Okay.
I want to say December of 79, but I'm not. It could have been October, November, but it's very late December of 79. Or I mean very late 79.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm glad you cleared that up.
Because at around that time I finished school and went to the UK, and I remember seeing that machine. It could have been a pre-production model, but I could be wrong. But I think I saw it in the summer of 79.
Summer of 79? Wow.
But it could have been a pre-production model at the offices of Hewlett-Packard in Athens. But I could be wrong. I was trying to find out the date on the Greek sales brochure, but it doesn't have it. I don't have a date for that.
Yeah.
It could very well be that you saw a pre-production unit at the sales office, because there were a lot of pre-production units around for developers, for marketing purposes, and I can imagine they might have sent units out to some of the sales offices for sales, to get the sales, because the sales force had to get up to speed on them before introduction in order to be able to be ready to sell them. So it certainly makes sense that there were pre-release versions out at sales offices.
Okay. It also had a data cartridge for DC-100 tape cartridges, the high-resolution video display with resolution 256 by 192, individually addressable, 16 lines of 32 characters, keyboard, and thermal printer. So you had everything you needed in one unit. This says the unit came with 16K of RAM. I thought I read somewhere else that it was actually less than that on the first unit. It's like maybe 8K?
No,
it was 16?
It was always 16K
okay.
built in, and with another 16 you could plug in the back to get a full 32.
And 32K of ROM, I guess?
Correct.
Which contained the operating system and the BASIC.
Yep.
You could program it in BASIC or assembly language. And Everett, I know you've already talked about the fact that you wrote an assembler for this machine.
Yep.
You were the one who wrote that. And I don't know, did you know how the sales ever were on that? Do you think most people programmed in BASIC rather than assembly language on this?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm sure that a vast majority of the people wrote in BASIC rather than assembler.
The BASIC programs that I saw in action seemed extremely slow.
Oh, yeah.
Especially
Unbelievable.
if there were any graphics involved.
Yeah, when I bought my own HP85 in early 2000, and I fired it up and I wrote some routine, some basic program to do some graphics. I was horrified to see how slow that thing was. Unbelievable. Yeah. And
it was another time.
Yeah.
Technology was.
We're spoiled now. Absolutely.
Yes.
But
right.
I didn't remember it to be, and that's it. I didn't remember it to be so slow. Back in 1980, it looked okay, but now it looked, I was wondering how people could stand to work with that thing. Very, very slow, unbelievably slow. And I wrote some routine to transfer some stuff from a diskette drive via the serial interface onto another computer, a Unix computer. And I was horrified to realize that my program was CPU bound. It was doing I/O, but the program was so slow that it was making the process very, 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 very slow. And I can imagine that somebody seeing this would immediately grab for the assembly manual to try and make the thing run faster. And in assembly, it ran pretty fast. I mean, it could do games.
Yeah, if you optimize into assembly, you can. It actually ran very quickly for that time, and that's how I got to where I ended up was because one of the engineers wanted their basic program to run faster, and they asked me to translate it to a binary program.
Okay, well, the 85 apparently was successful enough that they decided to diversify the product line. In February 82, the 87A was introduced. Actually, at that time, it was only called the 87, but later it was called the 87A. This one had a 9-inch diagonal CRT with 32K of RAM and built-in HP85B for I/O. Now, is this the screen you were talking about, Vassilis, that is actually, it's wider than it is high, right? It's not a square.
Yeah, it's very characteristic. I mean, if you see a machine with this kind of screen, you will never forget it. I mean, it looks totally weird.
Yeah. And this one didn't have a built-in printer or mass storage, but instead relied on the HPIB for printing or a disk drive. It also allowed for a larger memory space, so you could plug in up to 4 RAM cards. And the extra RAM could be configured as a high-speed RAM disk using an eDisk ROM. Now, I understand the 87A was BASIC compatible with the 85A.
The 87 could read and translate. Internally, the structure of the basic programs were upside down. On the 85, you were limited to 64K of memory, half of which was ROM and half of RAM. And the basic programs were loaded starting at the lower RAM address, and as they executed, they were executing up towards higher addresses. Mm-hmm. So it's lower to higher. And that worked fine for the 85. But now you go to the 87, and they designed an extended memory controller.
Right.
It was the same CPU that was still limited to 64K address space, but they created this extended memory controller that had pointers out into a larger block of RAM. And in order to make that RAM work kind of invisibly contiguous with the built-in natural CPU RAM, they had to kind of turn everything upside down so that the basic program started at the highest addresses and extended down towards the lower addresses. And additionally, they made the line numbers on the 85 were 2 bytes, and on the 87 they extended it to 3-byte line numbers. So you could have, instead of 9999 on the 85 as the largest line number, on the 87 it was 5 nines, 99999. And so the 87 was able to read 85 basic programs and then switch them around and retokenize them and change them so that they looked like 87 programs. And it could run them. The basic statements were compatible. So once it was converted, it could run them just fine. But the 85 is unable to read, of course, 87 programs because it doesn't know anything about the 87.
But if you can convert a basic program into ASCII and then get the 85 to read it. So as long as you don't use features for the 87, specific to the 87, it will be able to read it back. I mean, it's not a one-way street.
Sure.
Yeah, that's correct. You can, by translating to ASCII and then reparsing it on the 85, you could move it back. Mm-hmm. But that feature's not built in. It's not an easily done thing.
The other thing is that the new screen dimensions also introduced additional complexity, because then if you move the program from the 85 to the 87, a circle would no longer be a circle. It would be an ellipse. Right. So you'd need to, touch up your basic program if it used graphics.
Now, I understand it says, I've got a note here, that machine language programs would not port. Is that because the processor was different?
Well, the processor was the same, but the 85 was only able to load one binary program at a time, whereas on the 80, and that was when they were first designing the system, they thought, well, one binary program is sufficient. I mean, for any given task, why would you need more than one binary program? But once we developed the assembler ROM and binary programs started to proliferate, and they found out that people like to expand the capabilities of the basic system, it was quickly realized that, well, we need to be able to load more than one binary program at a time. So on the 87, they support loading 5 binary programs, and due to the upside-down nature of the RAM usage, binary programs are loaded in kind of a different place, in a different way, and binary programs inherently almost always make system calls. They jump to addresses in the basic ROMs, mm-hmm. And of course those are going to be completely different on the 87 than what they were on the 85. So because of that, you can't use the binary programs back and forth any more than you can use the ROMs. The 85 ROMs can't be plugged in and used in the 87 and vice versa.
They have a different color. The labels have different colors, so you can easily tell them apart.
Oh, the labels on the between the 85
on the ROMs,
and, the ROMs.
The 85 labels were white on green, and the 87 labels are yellow on green.
All right. Well, the Series 80 was diversified even further with the introduction of the HP86 in July '82, which was essentially an 87A built in a modular fashion and more RAM.
It didn't have a monitor built in. It was after the 85. A lot of people said, I don't need the funny cartridge, the tape cartridge or the printer.
Yeah.
I want to use diskette drives, and I want to use a proper printer, especially for, business in inverted commas. I mean, I cannot see people doing word processing on the 6-inch screen, but I actually saw a system, I told you the previous time, in France being sold with an HP83, which didn't have the print. It was an 85 without the printer and without the tape drive. It just had a little screen on one side, and the other one was...
The code name for that was Virgo. Virgo as in the Virgin, because it didn't have a tape drive slot.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that one actually came with an HP85B interface, and I guess, I don't remember, but I guess they were 5.25-inch floppies, and one of these HP printers that would print like a typewriter, good quality output. So I guess it, after the people that thought of the 83 model would, take the obvious step and say, why not produce another machine that doesn't have a printer and a tape drive, and that would have been the 87. And then they would say, okay, if we want to go for business applications, we need a decent screen, so we will just have an external monitor, and then you have to reduce the cost of the basic unit, of the main unit, and they did that by creating the 86A that had a built-in Centronics printer, which at the time was the de facto printer port. Every computer had a Centronics printer port, and even now, I think not now, but 10 years ago, if you bought a laser printer, it would still have a Centronics port. And then they went, to me, it was a very weird decision with these custom diskette drives. And they tried to produce a very low-cost version of a Series 80 computer. I think that was the cheapest one.
That's why they went with those weird disk drives, because they run off of the same parallel printer I/O port as the printer does. I mean, the one I/O port services both the parallel printer and those weird disk drives. So as a cost savings to lower the price.
Okay.
Yeah. It's one of the Series 80 machines that I really don't like. It looks, to me at least, it looks kludgy, and I refuse to buy one. So I don't. It's the only machine I don't have.
And interestingly, the 86A looks remarkably similar to an Apple II in being that kind of just a low closed box with a kind of with a keyboard wedged on the front. And
yeah, that's true.
I don't think that they necessarily copied the Apple II, because I mean, if you think about it, this is how you do it.
Oh no, I wasn't implying that they were copying the Apple II. I just thought it was ironic that HP ended up with a machine that looked so much like an Apple II after Steve Wozniak was turned down for that project originally.
Yeah, that's a fair comment. Yeah.
Another point about the 86 versus the 87 is that dichotomy created difficulties for writing programs that looked good on both machines, because on the 87 it had a very wide display relative to its height, as Vassilis had referenced, but the pixels were square. So if you drew a line on the display on an 87, if you drew it at a 45-degree angle, it looked like a 45-degree angle. But on the 86, with the external monitor, the monitor was more squarish. So it's kind of like going from old-time square televisions to the newer widescreen. The picture gets stretched. Well, that's what happened on the 86, is if you wrote a program that looked good on the 87, drawing graphics and things, then you put it on an 86, and it would look like it was stretched vertically. And
sure.
It caused some problems at least for programmers, to try to make things look good on both.
Because it was software compatible with the 87, right? So
absolutely, 100%.
Obviously, people would try to take software and move it between the two machines. And, I understand the external monitor, that you couldn't use just a standard external monitor on that. Is that right? You had to have a special monitor?
Not really. I'm using a standard monitor. I don't have an HP monitor.
Okay.
I'm using a standard monitor. The analog monitors had little trimmer pots at the back, and you could configure it to work with the 86. In fact, I've used my 86 with an LCD panel with a video input, and this doesn't quite work because the screen goes off a little bit to the left, so I lose the first few pixels on the left-hand side. So you can use it, but you don't get the full picture. And on the LCD panel, I cannot change the timing, so I'm stuck with that. But
I had heard somebody recently make a post where they said that the 86 monitor was non-standard, that the signal coming out of it was such that it wouldn't work with other monitors, and that came as a surprise to me, because that was not my understanding. I always thought that was just a standard monochrome RCA video jack output, and that it would work with any CRT monitor that was designed for that kind of stuff.
So basically a composite signal?
Yeah, just a composite, monochrome composite signal.
Yeah.
And in fact, I would hazard to say that the HP monitor was sourced from NEC Corporation, and I'm saying this because when I was in London, when I was living in the UK, I saw a monitor, an NEC monitor, that was sold in one of the computer electronics shops in London, and it looked identical to the HP monitors for the Series 80, and actually HP was selling them for the Series 40 because they had a little box that would convert HPIL into video. And when I saw that monitor, I said, I have to have that, and I asked for the price, and it was too expensive. And then some months later, I was again in London, and they had that monitor on sale because that was their display item, and they were trying to get rid of it. So I bought it, and I still have it, and it looks, if you exclude the NEC label, if you put it on top of an 86 computer. It looks identical to the HP monitor. And this actually also had not only video, but it also has an audio. So it has a speaker and a small amplifier, a monochrome a single-channel amplifier. So you could actually use it for audio, to amplify the audio as well.
I'm sure that that's the case, that because HP did not have anything to do with the manufacture of those monitors. They contracted with some outside company. It could well have been what you said. They may have had a particular color of plastic, and they had their name stuck on the front, but it was a standard monitor.
So that takes care of that rumor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't sure because I don't have one and I've never seen one, so I just thought that, and I'd read somewhere that it was non-standard, so I thought I'd ask. So the HP87XM came out then in August of '82, which was exactly the same as the 87A, except it had 128K of RAM. So I guess the XM stood for extended memory?
Extra memory.
Extra memory, okay. Makes sense. And then in June of '83, the last of the Series 80s were introduced simultaneously, the 86B and the 85B. Now, do you know why they were introduced simultaneously?
I suspect that they were introduced simultaneously just because their project schedules worked out to be close enough that it was made sense to introduce them together and make a big splash and save money from having two different introduction things going on. So no big relationship between the 86B and the 85B other than they both included a built-in HP85B port.
Okay.
And the extended memory, but they really were kind of two separate projects that just dovetailed together.
I think HP at the time was trying to hit two different markets. The 85 was targeted at the instrumentation market, essentially the replacement for the 9825, where you wanted to have a nice screen where the 9825 single line display was insufficient, so you could replace it with an HP85 and use the graphics on the screen and the bigger screen to have better interaction with the operator or the user. And the 86B was, I think they were trying to hit the business market with some word processing software that came out at the time. They were also they had the CPM module, so they could attempt to address the Office market with the huge number of CPM programs. But I think the CPM project was half-hearted, and then the IBM PC came out, and everything was abandoned.
So the 86B was, for all intents and purposes, the 87XM in an 86 configuration, except for the external monitor, it was functionally identical. And I guess on the 86B they put an HP85B port instead of the dedicated printer and floppy drive interfaces.
That is correct.
And then on the 85B, it was an extension of the 85A. They looked the same, except for the label. But the 85B had 64K of RAM, built-in mass storage eDisk and I/O ROMs. Didn't have the built-in HP85B. And the HP85B was completely software compatible with the 85A. So it truly was just an extension of the A, it sounds like.
Just an update to try to keep selling machines as long as they could.
Yeah.
I mean, they had an advantage because a new generation of memory chips had come out, so that where essentially you got 4 times the memory per chip. So you started with a model, you put 16K RAM, and now in the same positions, now you have 4 times the memory. So what do you do with all that memory? You cannot use it because your CPU cannot address all this memory. So, but you know, the incremental cost of putting the higher capacity chips is very small compared to the price of the machine as a whole. So they changed the software to allow the extra RAM to be used as an e-disk, which made the machine much faster, and then use the lower 32K or the other 32K for RAM. So you got a fully expanded 85A plus the extra e-disk. So you had a much faster machine, but a very expensive one, because if you look at it, the 85B cost the same price as the 87XM, and you got the built-in screen and the printer and the tape drive. But I think the 87XM was a much better, much more powerful machine than the 85B. But again, they were looking at applications where you had a rack and you wanted to stick some machine that didn't need additional monitors or tape drives or stuff hanging from it. You just needed an integrated unit that you would slide into a rack and it would work automatically, on its own. And in fact, the 85 was essentially the laptop of that era. HP was actually selling a carry-on bag, which is huge. I mean, I have one.
Oh, do you have one of those? I saw a picture of one of those.
Yeah, I have one of those, and they had if you look at one of their calculators, the printing calculators, the HP97. So for the 97, which is a tiny little machine, they had the carrying case, and the HP85 case looks like the 97 case, but way bigger. Uh-huh. So you could carry the your 85 with this case. And in fact, many HP field engineers were using HP85s as terminals when they were out in the field trying to fix their larger machines.
Okay, I can't imagine carrying one of those around like a laptop. I mean, they weigh what, 20 pounds? I think I don't know. It's heavy. I wouldn't want to walk a large distance with that, but you could carry it. I mean, a few years later, you had the Osborne One, which was again a very heavy machine, or the IBM Portable, which was I think even heavier than the 85. These were transportable machines. And they were being sold as computers that you could carry with you, and yet they were pretty heavy. So by comparison, I think the 85 was probably much lighter than these monsters.
But you really have to put yourself back in that time frame.
Yeah.
And remember that there were no smartphones back then. There were no laptops. Everybody had desktop computers, and the idea of having a computer that you could actually lug around with you, a luggable is probably a better term than a portable, was still kind of a cool thing that, hey, I can carry my computer with me. It may keep your biceps in good shape, but you can do it. You can carry your computer with you along with all the software and I/O devices and everything in one big suitcase.
Well, that is the nice thing about that machine, is it had everything already built into it. At least, the 85 did. It had the printer, it had the monitor, it had everything
tape drive.
Needed. Yeah, tape drive, had everything already built into it. So you really didn't need to carry other things along with it. So it was nice in that regard. I think it's a little bit different, though, than carrying around some of these other machines that you mentioned, Vassilis, not because of the weight, but because of the size of the 85. I think maybe it wasn't built squarish like those machines were. And so,
the Osborne one and the IBM Portable had keyboards that would essentially close up on the machine. But these were metal constructions, while the HP85 was plastic. So it was, just by that fact, it was probably lighter than. I remember trying to move an IBM portable PC, and it in the mid 80s, I think, and it really felt that you really had to put up a lot of effort. I mean, I was wondering who would be able to go on a plane with these things. They were big and they were very heavy. But they were PCs. I mean, they were more powerful model machines than the 85.
Yeah. So, although these were marketed as one family of computers, I guess they were really split into two groups, with the low end comprising the 85 and 83, and the high end with the 86 and the 87. And despite the low frequency on the clock, the low clock frequency on the CPU, they were pretty advanced for the time, and particularly in the scientific and technical community, these were wonderful machines to have, and a really nice basic, and just very nice, powerful machines.
And if you look at the architecture, and I'm sure Everett is going to be able to talk to us in greater detail, but having all these registers on a CPU for that era, I think was totally exotic. I mean, usually you had, the 6502 has a program counter, an index register, and two accumulators, and that's it. And here comes the Capricorn with a whole set of registers that could be combined together. When I was looking at the architecture, I was very impressed.
Yeah, the architecture of the 85, the Series 80 CPU, is still one of my favorite CPU architectures that I've ever been exposed to. That, as you say, that large register bank. I mean, think about it. In a way, that register bank is kind of like the cache that modern CPUs have, where they cache a lot of stuff into memory right on the CPU itself for higher speeds. And it had that similar effect on the Series 80. Everything about the Series 80 was designed for efficiency of power usage and everything else. The clock speed of the CPU was 623 kilohertz. Not megahertz or gigahertz, but kilohertz.
Right.
but they got around that by the CPU instructions were very efficient and very powerful, yet taking relatively few clock cycles of the CPU to execute. And with the large register bank, you could keep a lot of different. You didn't have to move things out to RAM. You could keep things right in the CPU, in the registers, 2 or 3 floating point numbers, or 8 to 16 pointers into memory. You could do a lot of work in that CPU register bank without ever going out to RAM to fetch or store values. So that saves you a lot of stuff right there. Additionally, because HP had designed all their own controllers for everything, the CPU didn't have to put new addresses out onto the address bus all the time. As long as it was fetching sequential numbers, the controllers and everything they kept track of what address had last been fetched, and when the memory fetch occurred, they'd automatically increment their address. So you could just do read without having to put a new address out onto the memory bus. So there's a lot of stuff like that that was done to make the entire system extremely efficient.
And to make a comment on the speed, 625 kilohertz is slow, but I think the Apple II had 1 megahertz clock. The 6502 was running at 1 megahertz, and later versions of the 6502 were able to run at 2 megahertz. I think the Z80 was also running at 2 megahertz. So it's not like the others were, running 10 times as fast. They are comparable. They're in the same order of magnitude.
I say that's just how fast computers ran back then.
Yeah.
Or how slow.
How slow, yeah. but it wasn't really speed. The process speed was not an issue at the time. It was slow, but not very slow. It was just slower, but because it was more efficient, it was able to keep up with the competition.
It was still a lot faster than pencil and paper.
Well, it could do a lot of things. People were using HP41s as instrument controllers, and you can imagine that the 41 is much slower than the 85. So at that time, people were more patient, and things were. I think life was slower. The pace today is much faster, but at the time it was more relaxed.
And of course. You already had mentioned, Everett, the fact that the CPU operated directly on BCD numbers so that you wouldn't have round-off errors like you would have perhaps with other processors or other machines. So that was...
Exactly, nice. And it was, when it was in BCD, when the CPU was in BCD mode, when you did a shift, it shifted 4-bit positions. In other words, an entire BCD digit rather than a single shift. So to multiply a number times 10 only required a single left shift, which on a processor that only works in binary, to multiply by 10 requires doing one shift to multiply by 2, make a copy of that, and then do 2 more shifts of one of those copies to get to 8 times, and then add in the 2 times copy to get to 10. So there's a lot more overhead and work to do a times 10. Remember, back then they didn't have multiplication and division instructions in the CPUs. So the BCD definitely came in handy for a scientific engineering processor. And another aspect of the efficiency focus of the machines was the power supply. They didn't want to have to put a fan in the unit because fans are noisy, and that takes more power, which takes a bigger power supply. So they wanted everything to be run cool enough that they didn't have to put a fan in. And so in order to do that, the power supply couldn't be big enough to drive the CRT and the printer and the tape drive all at the same time, or even any 2 of those. So if you wanted to print on the internal printer, you first had to power down the CRT. Or if you wanted to access the tape drive, you had to power down the CRT before powering up the tape drive. So that's why when you do things on the 85, you get this kind of blinking of the CRT alternating between the CRT and the tape drive. Blink, 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 back and forth. And the same thing with the printer, which was kind of annoying, but at the same time, the 85 was so nice to be able to sit down to and work on, and it was absolutely quiet compared to the original IBM PCs or even most modern desktop computers. You've always got that fan running, that humming of that fan to cool the machine off. The 85 was absolutely quiet. If you didn't look at it, you wouldn't know it was turned on.
Especially compared to the 9845, which was making a big howling noise when it was running. I remember at the office, at the HP sales office, when that thing was running, you had to talk louder. I mean, it was a loud machine. The 85 was totally unobtrusive. I mean, you would hardly know it was there. And it was tiny. I mean, the computers of that time were big. I mean, that thing was very, 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 small. But, compared to laptops today, it's big. But compared to the machines of that era, it was very, very small. I mean, you could tuck it in, at the side of the desk and forget it was there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'd like to kind of finish up the history section here and just talk about it. And I know we've talked about this a little bit before as to why were they discontinued. Because the series was discontinued in 1984, as I understand it. And we talked about the fact that the IBM PC came out and that kind of killed everybody. But do you guys think there's anything that HP could have done that maybe could have extended the life of these machines?
No.
No?
They were actually working on a follow-on machine with a whole new CPU design. The project was named Aquarius. It was going to have a color display. It was going to be a nice machine. 16-bit CPU rather than 8-bit, but still following the same general internal design as the 85 and the 87. But when the IBM PC came out, it was very quickly became apparent that was the direction the market was going to go, and the 85 just couldn't compete. Yeah, the Series 80 couldn't compete with that. At that time, there were a lot of different kinds of computers, and it's hard to remember at this point how many different computers there were back at that point in time, and many of them were incompatible.
Yeah.
All of them were incompatible.
Yeah.
But when the IBM PC came out, that kind of solidified the desktop computer market, and all of a sudden there were knockoffs of the IBM PC, and it was obvious that everything was going that direction. And sales started dropping on the Series 80 because people could buy a IBM PC and get software from all kinds of people rather than just from one company. And that really was the end of the Series 80. I don't think there was anything we could have done to keep it going beyond that.
Yeah. It's always fun to speculate on, if we'd done this or done that or added this or added that. In reality, nobody survived the IBM PC onslaught except Apple. And
You have to go back to that era. I mean, when IBM came out with the PC, they weren't sure what they were getting into because they had the PC-DOS, but they also felt the need to support CP/M because they didn't know which way the market would go. So it was a very uncertain period, but soon enough it became obvious that the Office market was lost to IBM. So HP was left with the instrumentation and controller market. Mm-hmm. And you can see that the 9825 was obsoleted in 1985. So there was still demand for instrumentation computers based on the HP models. But slowly, these things could not compete. And also, I think if you have to design a processor, I mean, you have to spend money to design the processor, and then you have to spend money to design the computer, while the competition just bought a chip from Intel and saved all the processor development. So it's not fair, because you have to do a lot more work. It might be, and then you have compatibility issues with IBM taking over the entire market. And there were attempts to create machines that looked like the 85. I mean, we have the Integral PC, which was a very strange machine. It was portable. It had an electroluminescent display, which was monochrome, but it had an orange. It was orange and black. And it was running Unix. It was running the HP version of Unix out of ROM. a multitasking system that was essentially burnt into ROM. And it also had a floppy and an inkjet printer, all built into a case that looked like, I really can't describe it. It looks like a lunchbox.
It looked like a portable sewing machine.
Yeah, portable sewing. Yeah, right. Yeah, and that was it had an HP85B bus and expansion slots, very much like an 85, but in a smaller packaging and with a far more powerful system, and the 68,000 Motorola processor, which was quite powerful at the time. So HP tried, it did not say, I'm giving up on the instrumentation market. They did try various iterations and various dead-end products. But in the end, they went to Unix on one hand and to MS-DOS computers on the other. And the funny thing is I have in front of me something called a Series R controller, which is based on their Unix machines, and it's a huge thing. It's supposed to be rack mountable, so it's as wide as devices that bolt on racks. And it has a detachable keyboard that folds to cover the screen. It has a screen, it has a hard drive and a floppy drive, and it's pretty huge. I mean, it goes all the way to the back. And that runs BASIC. I think, like the Integral PC, it has two personalities. One native BASIC and the other one HP UX. And I have the BASIC model. And it just shows that HP was really trying to support their instrumentation customers all the way to the late 80s, and then they had to move to Windows because that's what the market wanted. Yeah. But let's not forget the embedded version of the Series 80, the 9915. Again, it was a version of the 85, but it didn't have a screen, and it was an industrialized version. It was again, its size, its width was half of a rack-mountable unit, so you could put two of them together on a shelf. Very wide, not wide, but it would go. It was very long because it would extend all the way to the back of the rack, and it had two additional features. One was that it had a bunch of buttons and LEDs on the front panel, so you could have some sort of, without a keyboard, because the keyboard was optional, you could sort of have some sort of control. You could, have a couple of buttons to press and a couple of LEDs for feedback. And it had a little slot so that you could slide in an instruction label to tell you what the buttons and the LEDs were supposed to be, what their function was. But it also had a ROM that allowed these things to be networked. And that was a very, I think, innovative feature for the time, because you could use the HP85B bus to network these computers together.
Okay, excellent.
But before we close the historical review, let me just add the 75C.
75C, okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Which was another product out of the Corvallis division.
Okay.
And this looks like a product out of the Corvallis division because it looks like a calculator. It's small, it's portable, it has an LCD display and a full keyboard, and it has the same Capricorn processor, and it's fairly, I don't know about, I think it's almost 100% compatible with the, close compatible, the basic compatibility with the 85 and 86 versions. But instead of HP85B, it has the portable bus, the HPIL, for the Hewlett-Packard interface loop. Mm-hmm. So that is, an even more portable 85. It's very, very cute as well.
I didn't know anything about that machine. I didn't come across that. That's interesting. I'll have to look that up.
Yeah. You can find pictures in the HP Museum. I don't know why they produced it, but it's very, it's a very cute machine.
Did this come out after the Series 80 had been discontinued?
It came after the 85.
Okay. So it was.
But it was in the it was developed in the early 80s. It was developed kind of at the same time as the 87 was being developed.
All right. Well, excellent, guys. I really appreciate it. This is a really interesting topic, so I enjoyed talking with you guys.
Okay. Very nice talking to you guys.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. See you later.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.
Once again, I want to give out special thanks to Everett Kaser and Vassilis Prevelakis for their help in co-hosting this podcast. I really, really appreciate their time and their expertise in the HP Series 80. I provided links in the show notes for all of the great websites we discussed during this podcast. Just go to floppydays.com for the full list. Also, please write into the show. There are many ways to do that. You can provide feedback at iTunes or on the website, via email at floppydays@gmail.com, via Twitter at floppydays, or on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/floppydays. I also want to mention that Floppy Days is a member of the Throwback Network, a network of retro-themed podcasts. Check it out at throwbacknetwork.net. And additionally, Floppy Days is available for streaming at Stitcher.com. Until the next show, pull out a vintage computer or calculator and compute as if it were yesterday. Bye.
So you're not hearing an echo now?
Not anymore.
Okay, good.
You're not going to pull that one again, are you, Everett?
Everett?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.